Can one shot ruin an entire movie? The Mandalorian and Grogu just hit theaters, and by all accounts, critics and fans have labeled the film as inoffensive. The Mandalorian show has always been about elementary storytelling with all ages appeal, and when the showrunners decided that the fourth season would be turned into the movie, director and showrunner Jon Favreau, as well as writer-producer Dave Filoni, decided to expand upon this elementary storytelling by not having anything in the way of character arcs, moral messages, or larger impact on the Star Wars universe. All this to say, the film's intention was to create a story akin to a Saturday morning cartoon. In keeping with the Saturday morning cartoon inspirations, the film is full of kid-friendly violence. Droids can receive violent deaths by mutilations, stormtroopers get to see explosions and blaster deaths, but human and humanoids were largely spared by Din Djarin. The one main exception being the Imperial officer who shoots a civilian in the first minute of the movie. The goal for the creators is to assign a simple moral superiority to Mando to justify his actions in face of how destructive his combat can be. The larger picture is accessibility. Favreau and Filoni wanted to create an all-access space adventure, and any moral complexity from the violence clouds up the image of Mando as a morally good bounty hunter. The drive for morally acceptable violence has been ubiquitous to all of Star Wars and action cinema as a whole. But in one shot, through a poorly timed reference, The Mandalorian and Grogu undercuts its own desired morality. That other shot is from Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, wherein Colonel Kilgore has just called in the napalm strike as to clear a forest line of hostiles as to allow his soldiers to surf without fear. The main problem with the choice to reference Apocalypse Now with a shot that I will call the napalm shot is that by ignoring all political elements in the script, the film, Mandalorian and Grogu, creates inadvertent alignment between the New Republic forces and the United States military. In that connection, the film positions the story in line with imperialist action and ideology, which is contrary to Star Wars' moral leanings and potentially problematic given America's current political climate. What is the napalm shot on a formalist level? It's a wide-angle composition simulating a helicopter shot moving to the left. From screen right, the X-Wings bombs strafe the launch tubes of the drone armies, as over the top the X-Wings fly through as they continue to get shot at by turbo lasers. Nothing on the level of content or form is that terrible here. The shot has a clear beginning and end, delineated by pre- and post-explosions. Explosions in cinema are exciting, largely for the fact that they provide a novel visual element to a composition. Explosions in cinema are exciting for the same reason that characters entering frame are exciting. It reveals information in a way that uses the confined frame of cinema. An on-screen explosion is essentially a part of blocking taken to a violent extreme. Additionally, the touch of the X-Wings flying through the top of the frame helps transition the shot into the following shot of Sigourney Weaver in an X-Wing. On the level of action, this is far from the worst shot in the film. That honor would go to this shot from the escape from Jannah's estate.
Grogu, I need you to go to the control panel. Remember the buttons I told you never to touch?
This shot is ugly on the level of color, composition, and information progression. Sure, the napalm shot is entirely computer-generated and lacks the authenticity of Apocalypse's Now napalm shot, but it's inoffensive to the overall scene. It works to show that the droid's plane supply got blown up. The problem isn't the shot itself, but rather the context. The reference to Apocalypse Now brings in one main connotation. The New Republic forces are like the United States military, and the Hutts and their armies are like the North Vietnamese. That one connotation brings in three main problems. 1, the connotation goes against the film's desired simplistic morality. 2, it leans contrary to the prior moral leanings of Star Wars and its universe. And 3, that connotation in the context of how the Trump administration uses popular media as propaganda creates a potential use for Star Wars media to be used to push fascist policies.
At high speed and low level, the F-4C delivers napalm fire bombs.
Napalm strikes were a common tool of the U.S. Air Forces to deal with the terrain advantage of the North Vietnamese. The use of napalm strikes as artillery was imprecise, and large swaths of bombs had to be dropped as one payload in order to cover potential enemy locations. This evidently led to collateral damage, as seen in the thousands of unjust civilian casualties, as well as the long-run health and environmental effects. Due to the adverse effects of napalm in a military capacity, the use of napalm and other incendiary armaments in civilian areas has been outlawed by Protocol 3 of the 1980 Certain Conventional Weapons Convention. Notably, it took until 2009 to ratify Protocol 3, specifying that they still have the right to use napalm in civilian areas if it deems the cost of alternative weapons would be greater than napalm or incendiary armaments. Beyond the bombs, the United States' presence in Vietnam is part of a larger history of United States imperialism and overreach. The rationale for entering the war being preventing the spread of communism globally led to a war that killed over 3 million Vietnamese on both sides in a largely unnecessary armed conflict. The US eventually pulled out of Vietnam, but not before $77 billion was spent on the war, with the only real beneficiaries of the war being those involved with the sale and distribution of armaments. The Vietnam War is one major conflict in the history of American imperialism that illustrates the brutality and the immorality of the United States foreign policy against communism. That brutality is a key point of Apocalypse Now. A major motif of the film is how the US uses violence to subject those opposing US values. The napalm shot is spectacular visually, but thematically, it's a barbarous use of force to create space for surfing. Surfing can be contextually understood in a colonialist interpretation as it illustrates Western concepts of exoticism and relaxation supplanting the local Vietnamese populations. The succeeding monologue by Colonel Kilgore elaborates on the film's anti-war message through the use of irony and his love of napalm. That love of napalm is a larger love of power and control.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Smell! You know that gasoline smell? The whole hill. Smells like victory. Someday this war's gonna end.
The more disturbing implication of the line and the scene as a whole is how willing American military forces are to wield lethal force for the sake of exercising power. In this larger critique of American imperialism, Coppola uses his napalm shot to illustrate what destructive power from the Americans looks like. The Mandalorian and Grogu's napalm shot does not work in service of any theme. It merely services the action scene through referencing a classic war film. That shot is only in conversation with the visuals of Apocalypse Now, and that creates a discrepancy between visuals and intent. Because the shot invokes not just Apocalypse Now, but other wartime napalm footage, any viewer conscious of napalm imagery is going to connect the New Republic to the United States Army. The implication is incredibly evident. The New Republic is a technologically superior force using long-range aerial strikes to defeat an enemy. The Hutt's planet is a dense jungle environment, and their armies are asymmetrically armed and organized. Simply put, the Mandalorian and Grogu positions the New Republic as the United States and the Hutts as the Viet Cong as combatants in a Vietnam-esque fighting environment.
And I'm interested in.
You did something very interesting with Star Wars, if you think about it. The good guys are the rebels. They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. I think we call those guys terrorists today. We call them Mujahideen, we call them Al-Qaeda.
When I did it, they were Viet Cong.
Exactly.
One of the main thematic ties across all of Star Wars is its anti-fascist sentiments. From the New Hope's initial positioning of the Empire as the Third Reich, to the use of armed forces called stormtroopers, officers wearing gray uniforms, and their actions of brutality against civilians, all referencing the Nazi regime. George Lucas then used the prequels to show how weak democracies can evolve victim to strong men with political and military power. Recently, the Andor TV series detailed the banal and bureaucratic diffusion of power in a fascist system, and how that power is used to exploit civilians under fascism. Even the lighter fare in the animated series is still in conversation with the anti-fascist sentiments. Frankly, it's surprising that Filoni, the creator and showrunner of the Clone Wars and Rebels TV series, created the most politically bereft film of the Star Wars canon. That's not to say that The Mandalorian and Grogu has no political elements. The film's Imperial villains are united in extorting common people for protection money through the use of force, and the film's arc on Shikari offers a light critique of blood sport and the rigged potential of sports gambling. But when it comes to the New Republic, they are framed as an unquestionable good. No part of the film asks questions about their oversight, access to armaments, or who they select as targets. That lack of questioning serves a story that just wants to be a simple adventure film. But simplicity and unconsciousness are two separate things. A New Hope is a simple film to be sure. Its heroes and villains are uncomplicated, the story is easy to follow, and the filmmaking is rudimentary. But that film still gives enough ideology to the heroes and villains to define moral good and moral evil. The Empire chooses to burn Luke's family, which incites him onto his journey. The Death Star's destruction was warranted, as it was about to destroy the last line of defense against the Empire's evil. The Mandalorian and Grogu relies on basic assumptions of morality. I suspect the only reason why the Hutts employ a droid army is that the filmmakers wanted an explosive X-Wing finale, but realized that all past iterations of crime syndicates in the Star Wars universe used human or humanoids. Think of Jabba's Palace Guards, Black Sun, or the Pike Syndicate. Star Wars is not immune to the mass slaughter of villains. Many lives were lost on each iteration of the Death Star. But those films consciously justify the deaths by making the destruction of each Death Star a moral imperative. The writers didn't see a need to create that moral imperative when instead they could just substitute in a droid army. What does the fact that it's a droid army affect the overall film? Well, in order to create a shot as tone deaf as the napalm shot, the filmmakers would have had to intentionally stage droids over any living species on the battlefield to excuse the mayhem and destruction to come. But that usage of a droid army in staging circumnavigates the moral problem instead of solving it. Ultimately, the film wants a big battle scene to be the story's denouement, but instead of framing the Hutt's droid armies to be as morally dubious as the Hutts themselves, it just makes the violence acceptable by changing the nature of the targets. This lack of consciousness on moral stances leads to the napalm shot because the filmmakers are more concerned with aesthetics than content. But ultimately, the napalm shot undercutting the film's own morality and the larger Star Wars universe's morality is limited to the scope of the Star Wars franchise. However, the optics of that shot play into real-world outcomes. The napalm shot isn't the only reference to Apocalypse Now in Mandalorian and Grogu. The first shot of the opening credits of Mandalorian make an homage to the classic helicopter scene from Apocalypse Now. In spite of that Apocalypse Now reference, the remainder of the Mandalorian and Grogu's opening scenes are actually a reference to Top Gun's opening credits. The opening credits sequence shows ships landing, being serviced and refueled, and heat rays obscuring these ships, all with a harsh yellow tint over the scene. As an homage, it's a harmless reference to some far more stylistically interesting films, but it again positions the New Republic as the United States military. And here's the rub. The Top Gun films are unashamed military propaganda. They are created hand in hand with the U.S. Department of Defense as to spike military recruitment. And knowing that the U.S. Air Force is responsible for all the aerial napalm bombardments in Vietnam, it's again tone deaf to create a shot that correlates the good guys of the story with bombing runs, imperialism, and casualties. What's far more prescient for this issue is how current U.S. President Donald Trump has used Star Wars and other popular media to push his political objectives. On May 4th of 2025, Trump tweeted himself holding a red lightsaber saying, "Happy May 4th to all, including the radical left lunatics who are fighting so hard to bring Sith Lords, murderers, drug lords, and dangerous prisoners, and well-known MS-13 gang members back into our galaxy. You're not the rebellion, you're the Empire." For the 2026 May 4th post, he posted himself in the Mandalorian's silver armor holding the American flag, with a caption reading, "In a galaxy that demands strength, America stands ready. This is the way. May the 4th be with you." These were both posted on the White House's official account. This is the danger of imagery without meaning or consciousness. One of the most controversial aspects of Trump's second presidency has been the waves of mass arrest and violence from ICE agents in 2026. The use of a politicized police force to carry out the orders of an executive against minority population sectors or dissidents is in line with historically fascist analogs such as the Gestapo or Mussolini's OVRA. The litany of documented deaths, sexual assault, and other abuses perpetrated by the hands of ICE officers has turned what Trump has stated as a wave of mass deportations into a catastrophe for all parties involved. His foreign policy has created a war in Iran over the shaky causes of nuclear weapons, created questions about overreach. Trump has also continued America's strong relationship with the State of Israel, who is responsible for the genocide in the Gaza Strip and an untold amount of international crimes across all of Palestine and the Middle East at large. There's more to be said, but Trump's government has taken active steps to emulate fascist governments, and fascist governments are what Star Wars has always made to be the villain of its varied stories. The Mandalorian and Grogu does not endorse any fascist or imperialist policies explicitly, but the subtext of the napalm shot does create an unfortunate correlation. In the New Republic being the heroes of the final battle, the film positions these napalm strikes as good and necessary to secure victory. Through this, the film literally dehumanizes the enemy forces by making them droids as to avoid any sort of moral complications. It's fair to be skeptical of this connotation. The film's intent was always to be a fun adventure film, and Favreau and Filoni have always enjoyed referencing classic films. While the napalm shot may be a little bit tone deaf, its perception is ultimately in the hands of the individual. I can't speak to any of the creators' political beliefs, but it's hard to discern any political meaning from one 3-second shot in the middle of a film utterly devoid of political sentiments. But the issue isn't that lack of political consciousness. The historical rise of fascism and authoritarian rule has always been precipitated by the general public's consent. Hitler and Mussolini were democratically elected. So was Senator Palpatine. But their machines of propaganda and brute force behind the scenes create narratives. Strongman leaders are almost always accompanied by a halo-like narrative where all their actions are justified, and any criticism is hand-waved as media-driven and propagandistic. There is a creation of in and out groups, which further rabbit holes support for the leader. We see this out-group effect in the film, as Sigourney Weaver states that the Hutts were working with John O'Coin, even though we never see the effects of their collaboration. Weaver's character Ward needs to say this line just so the film can justify what is an all-out assault on a faraway planet. The film is nowhere near the political reprehensiveness of Triumph of the Will, but in an age where media can be so easily co-opted to support political narratives, The Mandalorian and Grogu stands at a precipice, where its official intent is non-political, but the elements underneath can form a dark interpretation of the world. It requires a conscious view of reality in cinema to understand how these narratives form, a consciousness what the directors and the writers of the biggest American media franchise fail to present. The napalm shot itself is bad, to be sure, but the issue here is with the larger state of Star Wars. Recently, we've seen what great storytellers and filmmakers can do with TV series like Andor and even the kid-friendly Skeleton Crew. These shows take the storytelling elements of Star Wars but have enough talent and consciousness to make great stories. Knowing what past and present Star Wars filmmakers can do, including Favreau and Filoni, it's depressing to see such a low-effort outing for the big screen debut of such a popular show. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. I don't know how often I'll be posting on this channel, but I wanted to start by making some YouTube videos about things that are passionate to me, politics and Star Wars. Please let me know if you have any comments down below. I'd love to hear about your thoughts on my editing style, my cinematography, and what I can improve on for the next video. I'd like to give a shout out to Ethan Collis for helping me film this video. Thank you and have a great day.